we are going to start with a very short music video.
All my ears are plugged, I'm ready for sleep, but hell the noise of runway 3. It will wake me up if it does fly. Now the dawn is breaking, no curfew, there's none. Emissions growing, more warming to come. Already I'm so troubled, I could cry. So Miss King, knockback 3, tell me you will think of me. Say to me the runway is no go, 'cause I'm living under jet planes, don't know when I will sleep again. Oh please, you must say no, you must say no.
Oh my. It's that good, we'll listen to it twice, eh? First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has come here tonight, and thank you to everyone who is watching us live on Zoom. Also, thank you to David Edelstein for turning up today and supporting our cause. Appreciated. Before we begin tonight, I'd just like to make an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we stand on tonight, the Wurundjeri Maribyrnong and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We celebrate the stories, culture, and traditions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders. We recognise their continued connection to the land and waters of this country and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Just a little bit tonight about your hosts. So tonight is brought to you by the Tulla Runway, as well as Climate Action Maribyrnong. Climate Action Maribyrnong are a network of Maribyrnong residents that are connected through action on climate change. They acknowledge we are in a climate and ecological emergency and the need to act accordingly. The No Third Tulla Runway are a coalition of grassroots groups and individuals campaigning to stop Melbourne Airport from building their proposed third runway on the grounds of the catastrophic health and ecological impacts. We are endorsed as a campaign by around 15 organisations, including Environment Victoria, Friends of the Earth Melbourne, Australian Parents for Climate Action, and of course, Climate Action Maribyrnong. So why are we here today? Well, really what we're trying to do is educate the community on what is being proposed by Melbourne Airport. For those of you that don't already know, Melbourne Airport is proposing a third runway that will run in a north-south direction. In building this runway, they will actually shorten the current east-west runway. And what that'll mean is that 95% of all aircraft will fly on the north-south runway, directing aircraft above people's homes, their businesses, and of course, our schools. What we'll also see is, because of essentially the east-west runway becoming defunct, because it won't be fit for purpose for the majority of aircraft that are actually landing in Melbourne, is that pretty much all aircraft will double in going over your homes than what you're currently experiencing. And in addition to that, the reason Melbourne Airport wants to build a third runway in the first place is to increase aviation in the first place. So they actually want to increase aviation by around 43%. So not only are you going to probably experience around double what you're hearing now coming over your homes, but you're then going to double that again because they actually want to increase the aviation that they're actually bringing into Melbourne as well. That'll, of course, increase road traffic going in and out of the airport as well, and cargo and trucks and everything else. So it's a pretty big project, and we're here to basically tell you why that could impact you, how it could impact you, and why you should be concerned. We've also noticed that Melbourne Airport has really failed the community in trying to tell them what is coming their way. Most residents around the north and the west of Melbourne have no idea what this project is. A lot of them don't know it's coming, and a lot of them don't know what it means to them specifically. They don't understand what's coming in the way of not just noise, which is what a lot of people seem to think, or how far the impacts will actually radiate. We are expecting these impacts to actually reach far enough to hit areas of Hobson's Bay, going out to obviously to Hume, Darebin, Macedon Ranges. So it does impact a lot of different areas, and we're finding that residents in these areas just simply do not know that they're going to be impacted. This is mainly because Melbourne Airport has structured it so that they only communicate essentially with Brimbank, a little bit of Hume, a little bit of Moonee Valley, but not much further than there. They're putting out a narrative that people are not going to impact it, despite the fact that their documents say otherwise. So it's really important that we actually reach out and make sure that residents have a voice and understand what's happening. No one can object to a project they don't know about. So we just want to make sure that the community is informed, and then they can make their own decisions as to whether this is right or not for them. As to where the application is at, as far as we understand, we have not had any update to the contrary at this stage. Believe it is with the Federal Environmental Minister, Tanya Plibersek. It's on her desk to evaluate at the moment on environmental grounds. Should she approve and say it's okay, it'll then be handed back to Catherine King, who's the Federal Minister who has final say on whether this project goes ahead or not. So I think what we'll do is, first of all, we'll address, we'll have our addressees come in, to speak to you, give you about a 5-minute talk on each of their specialised subjects. I just want to mention to anyone who's watching on Zoom that you may see a couple of links drop into the chat for things like what we're seeing in the background here, so that you can see them a bit more clear. You can download that PDF file. It's not really a monitored chat, so if you're wanting to ask questions, you may want to email them over to us. The email address will be entered in, and it's also on our Facebook as well. So if you've got any questions, we'll follow up with you guys later. After our speakers have had their talk, they'll probably go for around 40 minutes or so. We'll then move to a Q&A where people can actually ask their questions. So anyone in the audience here today can ask questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them for you. If we can't, we can always get back to you anyway. Then we'll finalise with next steps, where we can go from there here as a community, what we can do, if you wanted to take action, how you can actually get involved in the campaign and join us in raising the community voice. So I suppose now is a good time as any to get started. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Alex Ashley Chu. He is from Climate Action Maribyrnong, and we'll be discussing aviation emissions and the climate emergency. So give it up for Alex.
Good evening. Well done on coming out on a Tuesday night. I'm from Climate Action Maribyrnong, as Shannon said. Thank you very much. We're really happy to be working with the group here as a local community group. We kind of are dedicated towards change in the community, in particularly in the way that we're with the climate crisis. So for us, it's really about supporting different aspects of the community and looking for shared interests and shared values that we can kind of build on. As a group, we oppose this development. That's our position, I suppose. We see the consultation process that's gone through so far. I'll hear more about that tonight. But essentially, kind of as being something that's rushed. That is, for instance, the master plan consultation going through at the same time as the major development proposal, the consultation happening at the same time. It seems to be treated essentially as a fait accompli, as something that has to happen in Melbourne, and the objections of Brisbane Council around noise and support from council until certain issues around those things are addressed, which they haven't been yet, sort of being treated as collateral damage for something that has to happen. I'm only going to take a little moment up here, and I just want to, at the beginning of this night, put a big question mark over the necessity of this development, and definitely over the urgency of this development, because this is sort of essentially how it's being proposed and then being built. The argument goes, I suppose, that the population of Melbourne, which was sort of around 5 million at the turn of the decade, heading up to about 6 million probably by 2030, and maybe 8 million by 2050, that this just means that the airport has to grow, otherwise you have long lines at the airport and skyrocketing in Queensland or whatever. So kind of a sort of a scare campaign, I suppose, of like, well, we have to grow, we have to grow. And the problem with the flying is a very much unevenly enjoyed privilege, something that is enjoyed by many a little bit. Not anti-flight at all, not even anti-development, but we really want to put a question mark. For instance, if you think about it, the proposal is absolutely in line with industry plans, with the big industry, aviation as an industry, leading to they sort of project quite open 80 flights or so by 2050, roughly speaking. Considering that the population of Melbourne is currently only about 5.5 million people, that's a lot of flights being taken by a few people, and it's definitely. I don't really have time to go into this. We currently have about maybe 2 million tourists coming in and out of Melbourne every year. Anyway, it's also, the next slide, thanks, Maria. It's also very much not in line with the most credible pathways to net zero. So from the climate perspective, I've got up a kind of graphic here from the International Energy Agency's roadmap to net zero, which is really, on a global scale, the most credible and integrated pathway for the energy sector to decarbonise. And I'm not going to kind of go through it in great detail. Perhaps if you just sort of flick the next few slides, you can sort of see they essentially thinking about transport and all the aspects and electricity supply and, the amount of oil that's released. It's sort of their job is to stabilize energy supply. And then they're heading, towards diminishing it down as they know they have to. They have this plan. The interesting thing about this plan is that by 2030, what they propose for aviation is the modest curbing of demand. And there's a very, very clear on this that demand for aviation has to be curbed. They're banking on increases in efficiency. They're banking on sustainable aviation fuel. I'm not going to go into that, but they're also banking on measures, economic measures to curb demand, which are not congruent with the plan to expand. So treating that expansion as a fait accompli, I think, is a very incongruent with the global bodies. It's also incongruent with the federal government's plan for 43% reduction in carbon emissions. Thank you. All right, we'll skip over that one. I think I'll sort of wrap up in a second. So just to kind of wrap up, I just want to leave thought that the idea that there's one pathway is something that you should challenge. We should challenge as a community. That's the right conditions for us to create lasting change. There are measures to discourage or just to curb the demand for flight a little bit, such as frequent flyer taxes. At the moment, we have frequent flyer points. We have aggressive schemes aimed at increasing sales of tickets. And imagine if we had that for electricity use or something. There was some kind of electricity in there, or license. So we really need to change those conditions. So the government that Minister King and Mr. Blutisek are a part of absolutely have the capacity to begin bodies to investigate this. A study was done, or a proposal was done in England looking at frequent flyer taxes. And it's not about penalising the people who take a holiday once a year. It's about penalising the people who are flying back and forth between Melbourne and Sydney continually for business often, and those businesses probably need to change slowly. All right. So I just want to leave that question mark, I suppose.
worked with children during his years. So what to say about health and looking after our kids and future generations. So I'd like to thank
Can you give a very obvious cough about 4.5 minutes? All good. Okay, let's advance. Which is, back up, first one, which is the question, will Melbourne's airport's current expansion plan for its best stop? This is based on a report made on Scotland's airport in April this year, where it was assessed by aviation environmental factors, and they show that I want to run through it because it's essentially our trend, Melbourne Airport's trend. Whereas Brussels has 220,000 flights per annum, we have 260. 28 million passengers, 37. The population, 2.1 for Brussels, but 2.2 for Melbourne's north and west. The reason they're so busy is that's where the EU runs from. So they're all jumping in and out there all the time. They use what's called the independent parallel runway system, which is both runways are used independently. This allows the most flights to occur. So it enables them to increase the airport's capacity from 350,000 flights per annum to 450 to 500,000. Problem with it is it's going to cost $2 billion worth of health harm per year. The costs of building the fourth runway, so we don't have to have this. And Brussels Airport, well, Brussels themselves, the population are getting compensation and remediation. Now, they are much wealthier than the people of the west of Melbourne. They can afford to insulate their homes. Most of the people in the western suburbs are going to struggle. The more vulnerable kids are, the more the parents are going to struggle to be able to pay. And those kids are really going to suffer. So what happened straight away was that the Belgian government said, right, we're putting curfew on you from 10 p.m. till 7 a.m. No mucking around. What we have here is 11 till 6. And very few people only need 7 hours sleep a night. 20% of the population are children, and they need somewhere around 10, 11, 12 hours. And 40% of people over 45, and again, most of these people need more than that sleep because they have a light, more interrupted sleep. The other big problem with this is that this is going to be an irreversible runway. They're planning to build this runway at a different height to the other one, so they can't use it the way it was designed because of how, well, that's how it is. We didn't realise how bad it's going to be. We've got a whole story, that's how it's signed. But it's irreversible. What can we do to minimise harm? This is what they're doing right now in Brisbane. So if you look at the first map, this is what they use in Europe. WHO uses, and that's the noise harm contours. Noise level, which noise. The rest of Australia uses the AEC or AEF, which basically just goes down to 20 AEF, which is equivalent to 60 decibels using the European system. And if you have a look at the other side of the page, most which is shown scratched out here, it's outside, but yet still because of all the airplane. It's not even inside the lines. It's not. People were 7 to 36% out here. noise stress. And usually it's basically, when you look at the Melbourne airport figures, they show even in the now noise is inaccurate. We've shown that it's actually have had increasingly stressful moments. Or all these things because of disruption. So if this is long term, that's what happens. So every 6 minutes, and then we can drop down every 3 minutes during the day, and then probably every 20 minutes at night. And it's the night time, it's the real harm, because what's going to happen is that your capacity to learn what you learn during the day is also reliant on. Have this little peaks of noise in the middle, but you may not actually wake. You might move a little bit. If you've broken the noise cycle, you've broken your sleep cycle. So during sleep, you can lay down or mid-class conversation that happened during noise flight. But out here in Maidstone, we're going to see between 27 and 36% of people are going to find that they are really annoyed by airplanes. 10 to 22% are going to have highly expressed sleep. Another 40% probably going to have chronic stress. So how does this happen? How does the airport have these really low figures that we have for hurricanes? If you look at the next page, which shows Marshall Bay acoustics, it shows noise and annoyance curves, and they're going up. And the reason for that is, it isn't noise volume per se that's causing this reaction. It's an unexpected. So if you've got a lot more airplanes making a lot less noise than an old big lumbering airplane, so when in their faster, they are slower, you'll get much more stress. And they're saying that we've got increased noise sensitivity. It's not increased noise sensitivity because we're not measuring noise, we're measuring our stress reaction to noise, and we're looking at noise as a possible harmful thing that they're saying to us. And people vary from person to person. 50% of people are very highly distressed by noise, and they're the ones that get sick too because they have to visualize more. Another 40% are distressed by noise, and the rest of us sleep through anything. So that's why that happens. And this could be shown. I apologise to the other side of the page, but put it upside down. But that's the reason that road noise is quite low. Notice it's up and down low, but aircraft is very high and speeds even higher as noise is louder. And that's because the noises are unexpected. They're coming from different directions, different loudness, different tones, irregular intervals. So there's a lot of different things that makes each noise event an unexpected noise and triggers the outside of the flight response. So just a couple of other things that Melbourne Airport has thought you'd be interested. It's not really. Okay. Environmental noise and ultrafine particles. The ultrafine particle research is about where noise research was 20 years ago. We know that decreased sleep increases obesity, diabetes, and hypertension, and that all of these things have a link to dementia. And covering that, it seems that high levels of air pollution are causing chronic brain inflammation. And we think this is leading on to Alzheimer's. Animal studies show that these ultrafine particles are built up in huge amounts in the olfactory nerve. That's the smelling things. And this part of the reason we think it bypasses the blood-brain barrier, which basically gives most of that. and that these particles could be the beginning of so-called flames, quite characteristic of Alzheimer's. And we also notice first things go with Alzheimer's, often they have an impaired sleeping. Noise plays a role as well. We're not sure what. We do know that with this flight or fight action, that the blood vessel linings are inflamed because they've been kept open all the time to let as much oxygen in and let glucose in or use a fight or flight. So this inflammation over time is likely to cause damage to the blood vessel lines, leading to hypertension, increased strokes, increased extended heart episodes, and it also that this is causing scarring on the way, and this is happening in the brain, in the pancreas, the lungs. So they get chronic things. There are other things that we know happen with noise: anxiety, depression, high blood pressure. Sugar levels keep on going up, so the insulin has to bringing it down. So after a time, if you've got prone to diabetes, your insulin gets used up more and more, and the likes of become right. That's it.
I'm quite significantly shorter than my kids. But thank you very much for that. There's a lot of information to take in, I know, but it is incredibly important information, and it is something that we should be talking to people about as well. And I don't think people quite realise how this can actually impact people's health. You know, people think, oh, it's loud, oh no, it's noisy, it's annoying. There's so much more to it. So thank you, Mike, for taking the time to explain that tonight. Okay, so our next speaker is Kay Shields, and Kay is a retired teacher. She will be speaking to us today about environmental impacts on local flora and wildlife. So thank you very much, Kay.
I want to say a bigger airport threatens urban heating in already hot suburbs. The airport is now so large, it is a suburb with its own postcode. An airport city is expanding over us. Traffic emissions are increasing, and climate modelling says the north will be hotter, drier, and have more floods and heat waves. Can I have the first slide, please, Marie? Oh, sorry, thank you. The land temperature of the Maribyrnong LGA on 6th February in 2014 at 10:45 in the morning shows a very hot LGA. The yellow and orange areas, which is most of the map, temperatures between 38.5 and 42.79. The urban forest strategy for this LGA states tree canopies can reduce daytime temperatures, but the canopy needs to be above 30%, and your canopy is way below that. At the next slide, please. This tree canopy map shows lots of white and light green that represent canopy as low as 0 trees or 18% and less. From 2014 to 2018, the tree canopy increased by only 1% in the Maribyrnong LGA. We are experiencing the urban heat island effect, and heat stroke is a life-threatening condition that has implications for all life. I have seen many dead birds after days of unrelenting heat and a ringtail possum fall dead out of a tree. Victoria has already warmed by 1 degree, and temperatures above 1.5 will lead to major and irreversible damage to our ecosystems. This airport expansion is not reconcilable with what we know about living in the climate predicted for us. A third runway will remove habitat for our local species. Melbourne Airport leases the 27 square kilometre airport site from the federal government. The locations of listed threatened species and ecological communities have been documented throughout the airport. It has protected grey box woodland and protected grasslands for the golden sun moth, the striped legless lizard, the growling grass frog, and the critically endangered swift parrot. Bird of the year, as Shannon said. Over 3 square kilometres of protected habitat needed for wildlife that will be removed for this runway. If this was proposed in, say, Portsea, I am sure the government would be responding to the cries of residents there. To my knowledge, the federal government has not conducted an environmental impact statement at the airport since 1989. So, it doesn't matter, I'll go to this. Sorry. This is the growling grass frog. Its status is vulnerable under the EPBC Act. This frog needs permanent water and grasses for feeding and water for breeding from November to March. Airports must reduce available water to deter frogs as they are food sources for birds, and birds threaten bird strike, i.e. collisions with aircraft. Birds are also required to be managed within 13 kilometres of airports. Managed means scared, deterred or culled due to the threat, as Shannon mentioned as well. The runway plan will reduce permanent water by changing the flow of Arundel Creek and diverting it 500 metres underground. It will dig up contaminated soil on the airport site and dump it into the headwaters of this creek. The University of New South Wales says frogs are particularly sensitive to chemicals and they need to be prioritised in urban planning and conservation decisions. The growling grass frog cannot survive actions that will reduce water and grasses. They need to complete their life cycle, and as well as contamination of their habitat. And the final slide is the swift parrot. The swift parrot flies from Tasmania to the southern mainland for winter. Its numbers are declining rapidly and have gone from 2,000 to an estimated 300 in the last few years. Habitat loss is the #1 factor in their decline. Grey box trees provide food and nest sites for these birds. The grey box trees on the airport side will be cleared felled at the 3rd runway. The airport plan mentions offsets, but this is misleading, as growing saplings of grey box somewhere else won't help. Old trees are needed for their abundant blossoms, parrots to feed on, and for nest hollows. Young trees do not have nest hollows. These trees currently provide a small refuge for this parrot and other native birds and mammals. Environmental experts say every little bit of habitat counts in survival of the species. A 3rd runway risks contamination of our local environment. Firefighting drills before 2010 contaminated airport land with PFAS, and these chemicals do not degrade under normal environmental conditions. Arundel Creek and part of the Maribyrnong below the airport to Solomon's Ford were contaminated with PFAS from this earlier action. The Victorian EPA advised no fishing, no swimming, no drinking of water in these sections. Digging up contaminated soil and dumping it into Arundel Creek risks pollutants being carried by wind and water once again into our environment. The Maribyrnong waterway supports a multitude of Australian fauna and flora, and we cannot risk further contamination to this river system. To conclude, to build a 3rd runway for an economy is not a truth, but a hypothesis presented by government and business. Our unique and increasingly rare habitats are vital for species that live here, including our own. Our environment must be protected and respected, and that means no 3rd runway.
Thank you very much, Kate, for speaking so passionately for our wildlife and to protect our vulnerable ecosystems. I'm right there with you on that. Our next speaker tonight is Mark Carter. Mark is from Flight Free Australia and he'll be speaking about greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Shannon. And thank you all for coming tonight. It's important. I work with Flight Free Australia on raising awareness of aviation emissions contribution to the climate emergency. And talking about aviation's contribution, it makes for a challenging conversation because just like we need to cut all our other emissions, we also need to quickly cut flying emissions, and that's confronting. And another runway won't make it any easier. But just like we willingly do abnormal things in any other emergency to get to safety, we can also choose to do what's abnormal to get to climate safety. Put it this way, would you get on a plane that had a 10% chance of crashing or cross a bridge that had a 10% chance of collapsing? I don't see any hands up. That's because the 10% chance is way, way too risky, right? Well, hold on to your seats because Australia's current path to climate safety, the net zero 2050 pathway, has the same way too risky 10% chance of failing. Let that sink in. Net zero 2050 has a 1 in 10 chance of failing, of actually pushing warming past 2 degrees. Warming is shortly to reach probably next year, 1.5 degrees. Pushing warming way past 2 degrees to 4 degrees, where society as we know it could no longer function, where the world's climate scientists are telling us it's a place not to go, where UN Secretary General Guterres is saying telling us we must not go. That's why it's a climate emergency. Put another way, we're being asked to live in a world where the risk of our life support systems collapsing is greater than the risk of Balti Bridge collapsing. It's an insane proposition. So for an acceptable chance of getting to safety, we must cut emissions way, way faster than our leaders are telling us. But we can only do that if first we stop making new emissions, which is why we don't want a third runway, because of the new emissions it will enable, which are, again, more than Melbourne Airport reports in its plan now on Minister King's desk. How much more? Thanks, Maria. Has 50 times more sound. Melbourne Airport actually reports only around 2% of a third runway's estimated total projected warming emissions. That's because they only report the emissions from landing and takeoff of third runway flights. They say the total flight emissions, the rest of the flight, are not their responsibility. That logic would mean there's nothing wrong with every new coal mine proposal and gas extraction project going right ahead now because, hey, their emissions are made by someone else later somewhere else. It doesn't make sense. Melbourne Airport also deceived you and the Minister by reporting only CO2 emissions when a flight's non-CO2 emissions, nitrous oxides, contrail cirrus, etc., create twice as much warming as CO2 alone. Next slide, thanks, Maria. So when we use Melbourne Airport's projected third runway flight numbers and we add all the emissions that Melbourne Airport ignores, the proposed third runway will create in 2046 around the same amount of emissions as our dirtiest coal-fired power station, AGL's Loy Yang. Next slide, thanks. And before that, by 2030, a third runway will increase domestic flight emissions from Melbourne Airport by over 50%, right when the Climate Change Act requires cuts of 43% by the same date, by 2030. I'll repeat that. Melbourne Airport wants to increase its emissions by 50%, while the rest of us are required to cut ours by 43%. It doesn't add up. And it's worth briefly noting that neither so-called sustainable aviation fuels or offsets actually cut aviation emissions. So from our standpoint, we reckon Minister King has grounds to deny approval of the runway because Melbourne Airport underreports the third runway's emissions. Melbourne Airport has not addressed its legislated emissions reduction obligations under the Climate Change Act. And anyway, because Melbourne Airport itself is in no rush, they've asked in their MDP for an extra 5 years in which to complete the runway. Approval can be easily delayed. So let's not sit idle. To safeguard the community, it's got to include runway. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, definitely something to consider. You know, we've seen the heat waves that would struck Europe this year, and people are quite literally dying of heat stress. So you can only imagine what we're about to face if we allow these emissions to continue. You know, we're no longer in a climate emergency. We're no longer in a climate crisis. This is a climate catastrophe waiting to happen. And if we want to actually mitigate this, then we need to stop this third runway. So thank you very much for that, Mark. Okay, our next speaker tonight is Frank Rivoli. He is a long-time campaigner and former member of the Melbourne Airport Community Aviation Consultation Group. So thank you very much, Frank.
Good. Thank you for that introduction. Can you hear me? Well, welcome to everybody and those who are online. Look, I'm going to talk about something different, about the planning of this airport. I would like to put some facts around the history of Melbourne Airport. The Commonwealth and the state, local councils and the airport itself have all helped spread information that Melbourne Airport has always been planned for 4 parallel runways. The purpose of my presentation is to present some factual information and the forward planning for Melbourne dating back to 1970, which suggests this is not true. Fact 1, Prime Minister Robert Menzies in November 1962 announced a new Melbourne Airport at Tulla would be developed for international and domestic services. It would have 2 runways, 8,000 feet and 7,000 feet long. Fact 2, 1968 was the first time we saw the 2 additional runways when the Minister for Aviation erected a large plan at Sharps Road boundary with the terminals for TAA and Ansett Airlines. This was in response to halt the state government decision to allow residential development on the southern airport boundary and inform the public of future development and the foreclosure of Essendon Airport. Fact 3, in August 1974, community concerns were amplified in the Age newspaper, which ran several articles informing of the impending noise issues to come from the additional runways. And as we know, governments and planning authorities just ignored all of those informative processes. Fact 4, in 1971, the MMBW, our planning authority then, released its long-term planning policy for Melbourne. This included a second airport that would be required when the Melbourne population reached 5 million people. There were 2 investigations, both state and federal government, into the second international airport southeast of Melbourne. And after 50 years, this has failed to reserve a suitable site. Fact 5, in July 1970, at the opening of the Tullamarine Airport, Prime Minister John Gordon said, Tullamarine Airport will be an airport to operate 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Those living around Tullamarine would not be harassed, and it's government's intention that Tullamarine Airport would so operate without a curfew, subject that the state authorities see that there are no housing settlements built up around the perimeter of this airport. Fact 6, June 1989. The Federal Airports Corporation announced a 4 parallel runway plan for Melbourne Airport. The supporting strategy stated a 4 runway layout will provide for an ultimate runway capacity of 320,000 aircraft movements per year. These facts are based on government initiatives and policies designed to protect the public from aviation impacts, which have all been put aside. So what have we today? The Victorian government has not identified a suitable site for the second airport east of Melbourne. Victoria is reliant on one major airport, whilst Avalon remains underutilised and starved of aviation services. The federal government has not set a capacity limit for Melbourne Airport, leaving the pathway for further increase in aviation movements, possibly beyond 500 and 600,000 aircraft per year. The major development plan for the third north-south runway forecasts 402,000 aircraft movements by 2042. This is an average of an aircraft landing or taking off every 1.2 minutes over a 24-hour period. The area in which we're here today will be overflown by the flight paths from 2 runways used in the parallel operation. Aircraft will interfere with our amenity, health and well-being and the benefits we enjoy today. Melbourne Airport has adopted health assessments from other airports to justify the third runway. It has chosen not to include its own health study commission in the approval documents for the third runway. What are they hiding? We come now to the issue of what is being discussed around everywhere in our planning. That's the urban intensification around Melbourne. This will only increase demand at Melbourne Airport for more aviation and goods distribution, all centralised within our neighbourhoods. The Commonwealth and states are embracing urban intensification to resolve population growth, which is in direct contrast with their policy of the National Airport Safeguarding Framework to safeguard airports from residential encroachment. But this is the very time we probably need to start pushing governments to act in the face that they're going to do urban intensification, which is a model in Europe. Then we should be having the same standards, our noise standards, as they have in Europe. The noise standards for the airport and aircraft should mirror the same of the WHO standards before we build these things. And how will the state address the issue of the houses which aren't going to be multi-storied? How will they absorb the noise which is going to flow from and being deflected for the larger buildings? These are the issues that government, state government particularly, because all airport development has to be consistent with state policy. So it starts with the Victorian government, and they have a job to do here before we start intensifying any urban areas. We need to look at our social structures and our amenity. That's their responsibility. So what can we do? Well, we need to be heard. We need to inform our neighbours and our friends. Raise our concerns with council, state government, MPs. But I urge in the interim, everybody here is to read the Tonkin and Taylor, which is available online on the Bringbank Council website. This will give you a good appreciation of the risks that are to come from the third runway. So thank you again for your attention.
Thanks very much for that history, Frank. Hopefully that will spell any myths that are out there and hopefully provide some context as to where we've come from. I think there's a lot of people out there in the community that quite often turn around and say, well, if you don't like living near an airport, why are you living near an airport? I think what people fail to recognise is the fact that the plans have changed beyond recognition. They are not what was promised to the people in Melbourne. So it's very easy to judge people and say, oh, well, you shouldn't live there, when the reality is most people that live in these areas out here in the west, out in the north, they didn't know that this was coming. You know, plans change, you can't actually prepare for that. So it's something worth considering, and I think Frank's given us a really good dot point in history there that can help summarise it all so that people can understand where we've come from. Next, we'll be hearing via a pre-recorded video. So we'll be hearing from Marcus Foff. He is from the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance, and he has a message to send out to the Victorian community.
Hi everyone, my name is Marcus Fort. I'm the chairperson of BFPCA, the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance. We've founded our group at the end of 2020 as a result of the excessive noise pollution that Brisbane communities have been experiencing. And there's been a lot of work since in terms of research and community building and advocacy. And I think Melbourne communities will be quite interested in some of the things that we've uncovered, especially because a lot of it is nationally relevant and also relevant to you guys in Melbourne. So this is our website here. It's bfpca.org.au. We're currently running a campaign that you're very happy to join because it's about complaints that we ask everyone to submit to the Department of Infrastructure and Transport, and specifically the aviation branch, about their failure to provide regulatory oversight over Air Services Australia. Air Services Australia is the organisation that designs flight paths and is supposed to regulate and look after the safety and the protection of the community. But they've actually forgotten how to do that, and instead prioritizing the commercial gains and commercial interests of the aviation industry, and specifically their partners at the airports. The first one down here is 59, which is about engagement theatre. A lot of the time, Air Services and also the airport will ask communities to engage in consultation. It's really important to understand what the actual remit is and the scope of influence. What can actually be changed? Have decisions already been made before people arrive at these engagement sessions? So are they really actually, in essence, engagement theatre? Here you can read out more about what we found. There's also a very interesting thesis, a research thesis from Utrecht University in the Netherlands that talks about the social engineering tactics of the aviation industry. Do check that out. 58. Did you know that aviation noise in Australia is entirely unregulated? So you can complain about construction noise next door, about a loud party, about a dog that's barking. Everything has some sort of regulatory framework at the local or the state government level, but aviation noise at the federal level is entirely unregulated. So there's also no basis for complaints. People can complain, but those complaints go nowhere, which is what we found here through freedom of information requests. And this is detailed here on this page 54. We've actually been able to request and receive the entire training manual of the Air Services Noise Compliance and Information Services team. And those compliance specialists, as they call themselves, are specifically trained to make us go away. Once complaints are received, they are logged, boilerplate responses are sent, and then eventually these cases are closed without any further investigation. And we've heard through the Senate estimates process that they actually confess to the fact that investigations have not been occurring into any kind of noise improvements suggested by the community, which is just entirely outrageous. The buck passing, it relates to the compliance mechanisms, but it's actually quite a setup that is being designed on purpose in order to shield the aviation industry in what we refer to as state capture. So you can see here our little flow chart about how complaints are handled. And in essence, it goes in a merry-go-round where lots of finger pointing and buck passing occurs. So eventually no one is responsible for the suffering and for the property devaluations and the health impacts and the cognitive impacts on children's learning. I'll leave you with this. You can see there's a lot of information on our website. Do check it out. It's bfpca.org.au. And I'm hoping that at some stage we will all join forces across the country in order to call for a royal commission and clean up the aviation industry. Thank you.
So the reason we actually brought that to you tonight as well is you'll notice that there's a bit of a running theme happening around Australia at the moment in regards to aviation. It seems that the government seems to want to act retrospectively. Brisbane, as you can see, is having a hell of a lot of trouble. And for anyone who turned on the news in the last 24 hours, would have seen that Sydney is also experiencing something very similar. Sydney residents have been complaining for a while, and they're now putting in noise mitigation practices to actually help abate the noise that is there. So they're looking at, you know, putting in some double glazing and fancy roofing and God knows what else. Now, there's something really important to remember here. Number one is if we allow this to go ahead and we bring in noise abatement after the fact, it is your taxpayer dollars that are going to pay for that. So why the hell are we paying for something that isn't needed if we stop this in the first place, just for a large corporation to make some more money, basically? The other thing is, you can put in all the double glazing you like. It won't stop you breathing in the fumes. It will not stop the UFPs. It will not stop contaminating our soil and our rivers. It will not stop diverting the creeks. It will not stop killing our wildlife and seeing the loss of biodiversity. And it will not stop climate change. Bottom line, you can put in all the noise abatement that you want. It will not stop climate change. And that is probably one of the number one things that we should be fearing right now. So I think it's incredibly important to remember that whilst we could potentially put in something that helps a few residents later, it's going to come not just at a financial burden to the Victorian taxpayer, it is going to come to a burden to every person and animal and every living being on this planet. And that is what we need to stop. That is why we need to say no third Tulla Runway. So what are we actually calling for here, and how can we actually move forward? The big thing that we are asking for here is an independent assessment. Brimbank has been fantastic in that they actually called and solicited a health impact assessment that was independently done, separate from Air Services Australia and Melbourne Airport. Doesn't quite go far enough. What we actually want to see is an independent assessment that encompasses 4 parameters. It needs to encompass environment, because the last environment impact assessment that was done was in 1989. It needs to assess climate impacts. It needs to assess, obviously, the health impacts. And lastly, something that most people are not talking about is the economic impacts. We just don't know what this could potentially do in regards to business, to jobs. But the other thing to note is there's been a lot of research that has indicated that potentially people's homes could depreciate in value by 10 to 20%. So at the end of the day, there are a lot of things that are not being looked at. And whilst health is incredibly important, and we are certainly advocating to have health impact assessments, we also need to make sure that we are equally looking at environment, climate and finance as well. So what I'd actually like to do before we go any further is open up the floor and take any questions from anyone that's here tonight, and hopefully we can answer them for you. So do we have any questions? Don't be shy. No one. We're very quiet tonight. Yes. Arundel Creek, yes.
Months into the development of the past, what investors basically don't stop using vegetable because of the river.
Correct.
Yeah, it's very test done past in development.
Yeah.
Was the Jackson's Creek deep going to the road? Yeah. Question is that if there's anybody who needs to be the fact that the Maribyrnong River upstream like this place is not yet good. So I haven't dug up the story. The underground give us and running to run the creek, the existing one way must cover the Runway Creek. As soon as the second runway goes in, because it's on top of the river, everything that's dug up will flow into the underground aquifer, which is some of the evidence in the that's the aquifer together. Flowing to the plus flowing to the white junction in Jackson Street. But with the other level, we are very sure you, so outside eagles, turtles, there's fish in there at the moment. The floods have wiped out enough to get into turtles, like you see in North. There's an untapped environmental beauty beyond our And I'll talk about this like the same thing, treating our quick. It's very cool. It's a little quick. Maribyrnong River, and then you support the company. I fly up the river, up to White Junction. I swim in the river, I eat the fish out of the river. Myself and Michael take the test from the water. At this stage, and contacted the airport, and they said, I haven't had to take this.
Do you want to come up here? Do
Right?
you want to come up here?
I don't need the microphone. Everyone can hear me.
No, it's for Zoom.
Yeah.
So the people on Zoom.
I actually live upstream on the Maribyrnong with Mike Les. We basically neighbours. In the last, I've been there for the last 2 years. I've observed eagles, hawks, platypus, all sorts of animals, foxes, kangaroos. After the floods, all those animals have mitigated because they've been washed away. Right? Now we done tests before the flood with Michael, and there was hardly any PFAS in the upper Maribyrnong River. Now, once the third runway goes in, and nobody's talking about it, everyone is saying that Arundel Creek's polluted. And when I spoke to the airport environment people, they said to me that, oh, look, Maribyrnong River is polluted anyway. Yeah, I agree, it's probably polluted downstream of Arundel Creek that runs into the Maribyrnong and all the way to Footscray. Yeah? It's all been polluted. If you go from House and Sport right up to the Y Junction, and anybody can come up and I'll give you my number if you want, I'll take you up there and have a look at the water. Is pristine water. That water can be dammed and supply half of Melbourne. Right? There's a deep valley there which has got a good catchment area. But once the airport goes in, forget about Maribyrnong River. It's going to be polluted just like Arundel Creek is. Now I was saying the question was to Kate, but I've moved on, yeah. You know, okay, if anybody's done tests in the upper Maribyrnong apart from myself and Michael? Yeah.
Sorry, I only reported from the Maribyrnong, the Arundel Creek and the Maribyrnong River from under the airport to Solomon's Ford, because that's reported on the EPA website. I have facts for that. I don't know what, I agree with what you're saying, and you obviously observe it every day, but I just reported what I could find facts for. Does that answer?
What I've done is I live on my property is Maribyrnong. My submission to the airport was I thought about, I live in a place where I don't want to live. It's some beautiful area. My submission to the airport is all about the environment. I mentioned all the animals, the eagles, the hogs, right? I basically concentrate on the environment and on the polluting of the upper Maribyrnong River. And I had various meetings with the airport as well. But all they seem to do, as soon as you mention the Maribyrnong, they go, the creek. No, it's a river. I don't think they even know there's a river there. They keep saying it's a creek. I don't think you can get into the Maribyrnong and have a look. You can't see it from the Calder unless you've got a property on the upper Maribyrnong. You can't see it. So it's a hidden treasure, and the airport is waking up to it, and they don't want to talk about it. Michael knows all this. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's a very good point, and something that I have been informed of in the past is the fact that there has been PFAS contamination that not only goes into Arundel Creek and goes into the Maribyrnong, but it's actually gone as far as the Yarra because they all feed through. So there had been some reports of that. I haven't actually found the documents myself, but I have had some community members come out and tell me that. So I think the important thing to take away from that is everything's connected. So, we pollute here, it's probably going to pollute there as well. So That's a very good point. Thank you very much for raising it.
A question online from EP, to if anyone can answer it. What mitigating factors do you propose to assist us with all of the additional noise pollution?
So mitigating factors specifically for noise, as for current noise, or if the runway went ahead? Well, we don't really have any for the simple fact that we don't want it to go ahead. Simple as that. We don't believe there should be a third runway for all the reasons that we've mentioned. So the reality is that, yes, there are allegedly noise abatement programs that exist that does, from what I've heard, is double glazing, door fields, there's roofing that can actually be insulated to help decrease the noise. But again, I think the reality is you're not going to live inside a box. You know, at the end of the day, do you want to play cricket with your kids in the backyard? Do you want to go down to the footy oval and kick a ball with your kids and be able to hear what they're saying? Like, you can't mitigate all noise. So the reality is we don't want to see an increase in aviation. And again, this isn't just about noise. Noise is a big factor in this, no doubt about that. But like I said, although we can abate some noise to some level, it doesn't exclude everything else. So hopefully that answers that question.
These are noise mitigation.
Stand there, sorry.
There is a noise mitigation for the aircraft, and it's called a muffler, right? And you can't put it on a jet engine. So when the airport talks about noise mitigations, it's all crap. It cannot happen. There's a pollution mitigation as well. It's called DPF. It's a diesel particulate filter, which is fitted on all the diesel cars. Again, it can't be fitted in the aircraft. So the stuff that comes out of the back of those jets, I worked for the airport for 23 years. I forgot to mention it before. They're a big mean polluting machine, and they cannot change it.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And, you know, full disclosure, I'll also say my father used to work for the aviation industry. He was an aircraft mechanic for pretty much his entire life. You know, loved planes. I grew up going to air shows. You know, I used to love watching all the military aircraft and everything else. And, you know, yeah, I love the noise, but it was temporary. And I think that's something to remember is that's fun and games for a few minutes. A lifetime is a very different story as well. So I can tell you now, even my father, who's now 74, loves his aircraft, you know, still very passionate about it. He doesn't want the third runway to go ahead because he can actually see how destructive it's going to be. So, you know, thank you for raising that, because there are several people that have had a history of working in aviation that are still very much against this runway. So thank you. Mike?
Yes. That's what I add something to mitigation. You're looking at around $60,000 to $100,000 to properly insulate the pumps. That's insulating the walls with sound insulation, ceiling, putting tiles on the roof and walls. You put in laminated, special laminated acoustic glass, or you can put in triple glazing, not double glazing. And the middle glass has to be at an angle to deflect the noise. The house also needs to be pressure tested to see if there's any air leaks in the house at all. It's not saying that they do in Norway to save their heating costs. But if air can get in or get out, sound can get in and get out. So you then have to go and test everything. What we haven't mentioned is on top of that, that you need ventilation. So you need a separate ventilation system, drawing air from the other side of the house, away from the aircraft. And probably would be sensible to put a HEPA filter on that as well, because you're only breathing in ultrafine particles all the time. The second thing I just thought, bits of information I thought you'd like to know, that in 1989, the PNG Technology noted that looking at Tulla Runway wind data, they found the north-south runway could be used 95% of the time, and the east-west runway could only be used 81% of the time. Now, Holston acquired all the land they needed for the east-west, plus extra land they needed for PFAS. They suddenly decided, oh, we can only get 81% accessibility. We just looked at the most recent data. So that's not good enough, so we changed the direction. A little bit deceptive. The second thing is they've said, oh, no, the old system we had, which it was the 4 runways we used, basically 60% of planes went in from the north and out to the west. The other 40%, you had planes coming in from using the noise corridors, not flying over, and then flying out over farmland. So 80% of flights over farmland. Now we only have 50% of flights over farmland. And the way they want to use the aircraft runways now, in the Melbourne Airport Strategy Plan, this is from 1989, they considered this runway system and said, this is definitely the most used. You can get 148,000 flights. The noise considerations we have rejected. That's what Melbourne Airport said in 1990. Then comes the 1996 Airport Act and excludes aircraft from pollution. Immediately, this plan was scrapped by the owners totally, without any consultation with any community. They just happened. Nobody realised that because they used quite erroneous figures to get the results they wanted. So this is a fairly tough and dirty business. If you want to make a change, you've got to know what you're up against. That's interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So, are there any other questions? We had any more come in via Zoom? No, all good. Yes, do you want to?
So you're talking about a little bit of tax rate. What's now?
That is a really good question. I suppose the first step is we need the community to raise their voice calling for it. The next step is to, in my opinion, would actually then have our state MPs start raising this and calling the federal government to ensure that it actually happens. I think if we can actually keep this as grassroots and move upwards is the best way of doing it. We have repeatedly tried to contact both Tanya Plebiscite and Catherine King. They refused to actually reply to us. So we have tried repeatedly. If you have a look at our Facebook, we actually went to Catherine King's office and she refused to meet as well. Even after we she's not in the office, we said, please, here are our details. We need to have a meeting. We are representing several members of the community, as well as organisations and other groups. Nothing. Radio silence. Never heard a word from her. And we've repeatedly contacted and repeatedly contacted. So I think the only way we're going to get this noticed by the federal government, we will start raising our voices. We get our state MPs to start raising their voices, and that goes up to the top, and we get this addressed at federal level. I think that's probably a really good segue if there's no other questions. Yep, sorry. Yep.
I don't want to go into too long here, just about 12 months ago, myself and a few other neighbours have decided to let's look into the ministers and the MPP if there's any faults within the system for us to take it to court. So we engaged and a barrister. I think we've been going for the last 12 months now, emails to the minister, FOI to the minister. She basically now has gone underground, it's not replying to us. She provided FOI that was required for our case against her, and half of it was blanked out in black. We couldn't see it. So again, send a request to the minister again through our solicitor firm. And the solicitor's reply was, she's basically gone underground. She's not replying. So what we've done now, we reported it to the commissioner, to the FA commissioner. That report is in now against the minister. And we're looking to find enough information to be able to take this further to go into the courts. Now, I thought at the start we'll ask for money from the people, but it's never going to happen because people are able to find out trying to support themselves. So there's myself and another 3 people that will be sitting here that providing some sort of monetary value, monetary support. I think we spent up to now about $17,000 to get to not even to the front door. So we are continuing. It's sad because it's money that we haven't got. But we're put into a situation that if there's no legal action against these people, against the federal ministers, they just ignore. They ignored hundreds and hundreds of emails that were sent by the people, especially myself and through Michael as well. So we got a glimmer of hope that the solicitor is saying that there's enough information there, health-wise and environment-wise, that we can take this to court. So wish us luck.
Good luck. Thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do, just for the record, if you've got any other questions, you can always email us. You can reach out, on social media as well. And if anyone has nothing else planned this weekend, we'll also have an information booth at the Taylor Slate's Festival and Market, which will be happening at Taylor Slate's Linear Park this weekend. So I just wanted to quickly run through a couple of things on what we're calling people to do. What can the community do right now to take this campaign to the next level? First thing you can do is either scan QR codes or go to the websites. That is the first step. We've got a lot of information out there. We do have a lot of the documents and policies we've spoken about today are contained in a Google Drive, where you can actually download those and configure yourself so that you can actually have a look. There's pages of information there, and it's a very, very dry read, which is why we try and present it to you the way we do. But if you're interested and you're that way inclined, by all means, download those papers and have a read of it. We also have multiple petitions on our website that we've also encouraged plenty of people to sign. We've had, I believe it's over 700 signatures on it so far, and that was delivered to Minister King. Again, no response. But we are still collecting signatures on that. Join the Facebook group. Have the conversations with people there. Start asking questions about what people have seen, what they've heard. Knowledge is shared across that Facebook group. It is a public group as well. And the reason being is that we actually use it to share information with our wider communities. So you can basically find a post that's, got some information maybe about the Swift Parrot or something like that. And you can share that across your other Facebook community groups, or just more with your friends and colleagues and everyone else as well. We encourage you, although it feels like a fruitless effort, sometimes we highly encourage you to write to Tanya Plibersek and to Catherine King. The more we raise our voice and the more we can bombard their emails, the better. So keep at it. We're not giving up yet, and we don't expect anyone else to give up either. So please keep those emails coming and follow up on them. Don't just send one and let it go. Every 3 days, just send, have you seen it yet? Are you going to answer me yet? Just keep at it. They're there for the Australian people, so you deserve a reply. Raise questions at council. So something that we've touched on a little bit today is Brisbane City Council has been relatively supportive of this campaign. They are against the third runway and they have spoken about it. They have, gone over and spoken to federal MPs and whatnot about this as well. They've also put in for they actually funded an independent health assessment as well. So the thing we'd like to see happen is more questions being asked of councils that are not doing this. Ask yourself why. Why are they not doing it? There's this misconception that Brisbane is going to be impacted more than the others. that's BS, quite honestly. We know for a fact that Maribyrnong is going to, Mini Valley is going to, Hume is going to, Darebin is going to, Hobson's Bay, Wyndham, we know plenty of them, all the way out to Macedon Ranges. So seriously, start asking questions at the local council level. Get into your public question time with your local council. Speak to your councillors, email them, ask them what they're doing, ask them if they're doing anything, and ask them why they're not communicating this to their residents. At the end of the day, they've got a responsibility to make sure their residents are well informed of what's coming. If you've never heard from your council about any of this, ask them why that is, because it's really important that they should be communicating directly with their citizens, and it shouldn't be up to us, it should be up to them. That's what they're paid for, that's what they're there for, to represent the best interests of the community. So put the pressure on them and make sure that they're raising their voices too. They can get on this with us, so, you know, that's probably one of the best things that you can actually do from a local level. Look, there's lots of other ideas that we've got, and a lot of them we have spoken about on our website, and but one that is really important, and I cannot stress this enough, it is the most important action that you can take when you leave here tonight. Talk to people. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues at work, make sure people know about this. At the end of the day, knowledge is power. We cannot act if we do not know. We cannot fight if we do not know. And the only way we can be empowered is if we come together and as a group of people that are learned and educated on the system here. So at the end of the day, what do we want from everybody in the community? What do we want you to do? We want you to talk to people. And what is the one thing we're asking for overall? No third Tulla Runway. Say it with me. No third Tulla Runway. I just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for coming along tonight. Everyone on Zoom who has attended and participated. Hopefully the recordings all worked, and we'll be able to upload this later for people that couldn't make it tonight. But I just want to thank you so much for your time. I know we've gone a little bit over, but thank you very much for your attendance. And thank you so much for hearing what we've got to say tonight. Really appreciate it.